Today, let's take a look at this very intriguing offering by Ryan Swords, the Glamdring, as Gandalf's sword from the movie Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogy.
This is Glamdring, the foe hammer.
Greetings, welcome to the Misty Mountains. Actually, welcome to West Vancouver. Today, let us review this exciting offering from Ryan Swords, their interpretation of Glamdring from Lord of the Rings movie. You know, Ryan Swords is a company with some spotty reputation in the past. Full disclosure, sword friend Matt sent me the sword that he bought from Ryan Sword after he got a refund from them. Well, the reason being, he thinks it lacks the distinct leaf-shaped geometry found on Peter Lyon's design for the movie. Another reason is he suspects these fittings are made of not stainless steel as described on the product page, but rather other alloys like Zamax. I think that sounds like steel, but I'm not so sure about this. Yeah, very suspicious. So Zamax is less dense material than stainless steel. It could cause some problematic dynamics because there's less weight here, and that might be the reason that this sword is very lightweight, which I'll talk about later. Yet it's slightly forward heavy. Ryan Swords gave him the refund without much fuss. He sent this sword to me, and before I got it, I fully anticipated this to fail to cut or fall apart based on Ryan Swords' reputation. What I had heard on the internet by then, but it actually surprised me. Maybe I set my expectation too low, who knows? But actually, this turned out to be one of the best cutters I ever had, and it struts really well too. It handles like a real sword, not without any fault, and I will explain some of the shortcomings of this sword in detail, but there's just so much to like about it. Well, first of all, it's supposed to be not an accurate replica, but rather an interpretation, probably designed by a customer at Ryan Swords. They like Peter Lyon's design of the Glamdring in Lord of the Rings movie, and indeed, most of the design from Peter Lyon and some other armorers working on that movie franchise is very competent. They take a lot of cues from historical source, so that's really the right way for you to design functional fantasy swords. They have rather fancy fittings, but not outside the realms of the Lord of the Rings lore or practicality. So Master Swordsmith Peter Lyon was tasked to design Glamdring among other swords for the movie, and he took a lot of historical inspirations from swords like the Greek xivos for sting, and obviously the leaf shape from Greek, and also Celtic swords from the Bronze Age, and added to medieval longswords, which gives a rather elegant look, yet still maintains certain width on the upper portion of the blade, so the bevel will be broad enough to have a effective shearing blade. I think that it's a bit of a shame that nobody does justice to make a functional copy of Peter Lyon's design. It was given quite a spotlight in the Hobbit trilogy, where Gandalf used Glamdring to pretty much carve out paths through a horde of orcs and goblins multiple times. I also appreciate the extra effort to flesh out the lore. Gandalf found this sword in a horde inside Troll's cave, and he claimed it as his own, brought it to Rivendell to be identified by the Elven Lord Elrond.
This is Glamdring, the foe hammer, sword of the King of Gondor. How did you come by these?
We found them in a troll hoard on the Great East Road.
This sword clearly doesn't feature the leaf-shaped blade, and in iconic to that Glamdring. And indeed, you can see it's almost a blade with a minor profile taper and a tip geometry like this, not dissimilar to some 13th century Oakeshott type 12A swords. It also features a narrow filler, which is not exactly typical for type 12A swords, but this is a fantasy piece, so that's fine. As you can see, even Peter Lyon himself did a practical modification for a client, and on his sword there's blade geometry similar to this blade. Removed leaf shape. Leaf shaped blades usually lends to a very proficient cutter because of the broadening near here. It will have a deeper bevel from the central ridge to the edge. You will have to implement quite a substantial amount of distal tapering in that case, because you wouldn't want that broadening to bring too much mass, so the sword would be much thinner near the swelling of the profile, and at the base you better make it rather thick, so the handling will not be thrown off, because when you rotate the blade, the upper portion travels a much longer distance than the portion near the base, so it must carry less material for the sword to move like a real sword, to defend your life and hit your opponent with very limited time frame. Now, Ryan swords is fully capable of producing that, and you can see that profile on one of their other models, the Aragon sword from Blue Dragon. Since they take constant orders, you can ask them to swap the blade on this sword for that one, and also improve the hilt design and the material of the fitting. That's no issue. So let's just take a look at this blade. Why does it perform so well when it's given such a plain profile akin to type 12A medieval swords? 12A is sometimes referred to as the great sword of war. They have a slight taper in the profile, a slightly more acute point than most earlier medieval swords. Usually have a very thin blade. This one features a diamond cross section with very flat planes on the blade surface. So this speaks well of Ryan swords polishing and grinding techniques. You see, the blade has a very substantial amount of distal tapering. At the base of the blade, it's 6.8 millimeters thick, which is great for mass distribution. It's tapered down to 5 at the center, and at 2 inches from the tip, it's tapered down to 4 millimeters. So this ensures that it has a pretty good mass distribution. Also, it has this ricasso area, which is cut out to narrow the blade. For what purpose, I don't know. Maybe to simulate some leaf shape. But I do know that with a rectangular cross section on the ricasso, it will bring more mass to the base, which is a very scientific way to distribute mass. You want most mass to concentrate near the lower portion and less on the upper portion, especially near the tip, because as you rotate the blade, any swing, you can see that the portion near the tip travel a much longer distance than the base. This is how you handle swords. So anyone making swords want the sword to handle like an actual weapon should incorporate a substantial amount of distal tapering and profile taper. Of course, tapering also has a function to ensure the correct rigidity of the blade. See, this sword is actually quite rigid. Okay? It has a flex when there's a hard impact, but when you swing it around, it doesn't flex before you make contact with the target. Whether you parry or cut into the target, it ensures very stiff thrusting. It probably wouldn't thrust into mail armor given the geometry near the tip, but it has no problem penetrating the thick textile protection like gambesons or army doublets not to mention flesh and bone. With that, it also stabilizes cuts. So the Hilt's design also lends to easy index of the edge alignment. So overall, it's a very easy sword to maneuver and cut with. The sword weighs 1,269 grams, that's 2 pounds and 12.5 ounces. Really light for a sword featuring 36 inches blade length. Overall, it's 48 inches. It's a long grip, 10 inches, and extra 1.5 inches of grip space from this mushroom-shaped pommel. So you have great leverage to maneuver the sword, even though these are made of zinc alloy, which is a lot less dense than stainless steel. Therefore, it doesn't provide the adequate counterweight to the blade. Some people say that, well, the pommel is not there to provide counterweight to the blade. I beg to differ. If you ever handle a sword without the pommel of correct mass, you will feel the difference. This sword has really good handling because of the distal tapering. When you swing it around, it's really easy to stop where you want. And good trait for a properly made sword. However, it's quite blade heavy. It has a far out point of balance, 6 inches from the guard, which is less than ideal. It's a nice looking blade, and it has a correct tempering, also spring. You see the vibration node is here, where it remains static. And there's a shock traveling down the blade into the hilt. Also, the secondary vibration node is here, so your hand will not receive a lot of shock. The sword has a profile taper as well, like I mentioned earlier. Near the tip, before the transition to the point, it's about 2/3 width of the base, so it adds a little bit more to good mass distribution. This point has no issue penetrating any hard material, save for maybe steel nail rings. When I did some test thrusting, even when I lost the footing, I still penetrated the target 10 or 12 inches in, just through the entire thing, without much effort at all. And you can cut into a thrust, which is a real technique for you to combine defense and offense. The hilt is clearly inspired by Glamdring from Lord of the Rings movie. You see here, it does feature this central raised section with a plaque and elven or elvish etching. It features a simpler quillon on each side. Doesn't have the additional etching on it, but it has some good geometry, and there's no sharp ledges to hurt you. It's very comfortable to handle this. It's well formed, and it's not bad looking, even though it has this chrome feel because it's made of alloy. And same with the pommel. It resembles the Glamdring from the movie less, with all the exaggerated flaring of the mushroom pop or the scent stopper pop. It actually resembles a little bit more of the Toffer style pommel in real life. And it has many facets, I think 8 to be exact. The edges are not sharp, wouldn't cause any discomfort. Great. It also adds additional grip space for extra leverage. You see the transition. Lower portion of the bar has a ferrule or bolstered geometry. It has a alright transition to the grip. There's no very jarring ledges to hurt you. The grip is my least favorite part, even though it's not that bad. But first of all, it features a tapered geometry, which is nice. However, the circumference is just too much. When a grip is too fat, you can have a hard time gripping onto the sword. When it's too thin, it turns around in your hand. This one is clearly the former case, and it doesn't really help. It has just bare wood as a grip, without any leather wrapping, any texture, like depression or cord underwrapping, there's some traction in the sword. It definitely would not turn around, but it's a little bit hard. Spread your fingers apart. It has to be just right. Of course, anyone with some power tools or sandpaper can reshape this into a weighted grip and take some material off to reduce the circumference. So that's fine. About its construction, because it features a sturdy tan, it has holes drilled into the tan. This is a feature you find on ancient swords, but some medieval swords, the original ones, did have this. Notably, the Type 18Z sword from Alexandria Arsenal, now housed at Metropolitan Museum, does seem to have brass pins through the tan to secure the grip. So there's no worry of the security here. It's just a little bit unconventional. Also, wooden core is commonly featured on medieval swords, but they usually have leather wrapping. I did see some swords in the museum with just a bare wood grip, but I don't know whether that's from the restoration process or it came with that originally. So one could do a project, just some sanding, reshaping of the grip to make it more ergonomic, and have leather wrapping with cord underneath to resemble Glamdring from the Lord of the Rings and movie Hobbit franchise. And the way Gandalf was portrayed in the movie to use his sword is quite a viable style. He held the sword in one hand, the other one holding on to his staff, where you can have multiple grips to do some striking and parrying with the staff. There's some flexibility to it, and still using the sword in your main hand to do mostly damaging maneuvers. Well, the way this sword is balanced is not great for one-handed usage. You see, the weight itself is actually pretty manageable as a one-handed sword. It features excellent distal tapering and some profile tapering. So with such a long grip, even without the correct mass on the pommel, your offhand can still provide it. With leverage, it'll do the job. You have pretty excellent point position, so thrusting is pretty reliable, especially with a rigid blade. But as a one-handed sword, it's just too difficult to control it. It's still possible, but you feel that the sword is fighting you. It's a little bit hard to keep in your own hand, as grip is too fat. It also came with this wooden scabbard, just bare wood with some leather strip wrapping on top for you to grab onto it, perhaps. I don't care much for that. But the color and the texture of the wood are nice. Here you have a huge shape. Not sure it's steel or alloy. Has this very dramatic tip. Here it has a cutout to fit the geometry of the crossguard. It's relatively flush. A bit of a gap, but not really unacceptable for this price range. The retention is pretty good. You see, it doesn't really come out, but throwing is really easy. So I like the scabbard. I would like it more if it features leather wrapping on top of wooden core. It's a little bit too thick. Well-made scabbards are usually fairly thin to fit the sword like a glove. But it's nice to have one, especially for the price tag. Ryan Swords is a company with some questionable reputation from the past. Some customer claim that they order laminated steel on their swords, but when they take it apart, they find out that it's not actually jacketed laminated steel. It's really speak ill of the company's reputation. Whether there's something lost in translation or not, I can hardly say, as they don't have lots of representatives to speak fluent English to communicate with customers. So there could be some miscommunication there. Also, they don't have the means to defend themselves here in the West. Now, you see that they partner up with Sword & Nostra to sell their swords here in the West with a more professional website and better customer service. It's a 7/24 customer hotline. You can talk to a real person in real time, make your very concrete demands and requirements of the order. But I would still prefer ordering from Ryan Swords' own outlet website. It's much more affordable there. You see, Ryan Swords seems to be an outlet of affordable line of swords in its parent sword company. It's a large enterprise in China, and some of the owners' own creation, like Chinese swords, high-end, not even reproductions, just artistic interpretations, sells for $250,000. So really, they only sell the swords probably made by their apprentices and junior employees. And they have a good process overall. And I think the quality control, for the most part, is adequate. Their swords are mostly durable. Matt used his sword to chop into a steel shield after he got a refund to test the steel. It has a somewhat noticeable deform that he has since buffed out. It's not overly noticeable now. Now, it has a very fine edge geometry. One single primary bevel from the central ridge or the fuller to the edge. This is very characteristic of Chinese-made swords. Because of that, the fine edge geometry probably made it a little bit more fragile against hard targets. So this is primarily a sword targeting at soft and medium cutting. I chopped wood with it, and I also cut dozens of targets. It didn't really have any dulling on the edge, so it's hard enough, probably above HRC 50, which is already much harder than most original medieval swords. Now, overall, I think this is a great offering. I will be interested in Ryan Swords' other offerings in the future, and you can also give them a call to make some custom order. Like I said, swap out the blade on this one with a more pronounced, with an actual leaf shape and actual steel used for the pommel and the crossguard, maybe leather wrapping even for the grip. Objectively speaking, it's a great offering for a fantasy sword. You can see a competent fantasy design can implement ergonomic and practical design into the hilt. So nothing dramatic or over the top, yet still is clearly fancy with historical elements, practical elements. So I'm really happy with the sword, and I'll see you on my next sword review. Until then, if you find entertainment value in this video, please like and subscribe.